have a small application here. There's just really 4 lines of code, and it's going to get itself into trouble. I'm setting up a vector of integers. We talked about vectors in the standard library module of this course, and push one integer onto it, the number 1. So there's only one element in my vector. Then I'm going to try to access a specific element. The at method, a lot like the square brackets, takes you to a particular element of the vector. There is no element number 99 because I've only pushed one integer onto my vector. So you can expect that this is going to cause me trouble. I'm breaking my own best practice of dealing with problems as close to the source as possible so that you can see exceptions without my having to construct a super complicated chain of function calls. It will get a little more complicated as the demos go on. I'm going to run this application. You can see I have a breakpoint here. And we'll just step over a line at a time. So that declares the vector, that puts the number 1 into the first element of the vector, and now I'm going to try to access element number 99. And an exception has been thrown. And this is an unhandled exception because I'm not catching it. I'll show you how to catch them shortly, but when you don't catch them at all, they end up being shown to the user. So this says unhandled exception at memory location in executable name. And then this is really important right here. Standard, that's the namespace, out of range, at memory location, whatever. I don't care about that. It's telling me the type of the exception that's been thrown. And because it's a well-named class, I can just read that, out of range. In fact, because the standard library is all done as headers, I can even see here the comments and words and so on to help me understand what's going on. Now, your exceptions are not always thrown by code that you have immediate access to, the way that we have access to the headers of the standard library. And as well, I'm reading this message with my eyes, invalid vector subscript, but there's no way my code is able to react and do something intelligent. In order for my code to be able to react, at least even to just construct a nicer error message for my end user, I need to catch the exception. So I'm going to stop debugging and come back here, and I'm going to wrap my code in a try. And follow it with a catch. Now, when you catch an exception, you need to say what it is that you are catching. And for now, and I'll explain this in more detail shortly, I'm going to catch this exception reference E. I don't have a lot of options about what to do with it, but I will print out its message. Let me just neaten up these lines. In the more general case, this might be a chain of function calls that would go a long way down. All the way down in that chain, whenever the exception is thrown, none of those functions return. All of them will come back and transfer control to a catch statement. Now, it has to be the appropriate catch statement, and I'll cover that in more detail shortly. I just don't want you to think that any catch statement will do. I'm going to put a breakpoint here now and run the application. I'll just let it run. And you can see that we end up here in the catch block. And I can hover over this exception E and see that same message, invalid vector subscript. I can also let this print out onto the screen. You can see the message is there also. At that point, if this application did something real, I would have to react in some way. But all I know is that something went wrong. I caught just an exception. When we got that message in the debugger, it was an out-of-range exception. And that's really a better choice to catch. Really, the only way to learn the names of these exceptions is to see them being thrown. That's the number one way. or to read the documentation, which I know is a little on the scary side. You can, in the case of vector, literally read its code, probably not what you want to do. If I come all the way up to the top, you notice that this includes standard exception. I can right click here and say open this document, and in here I can see exception classes being defined. This is reasonably difficult to read, but the out of range exception is here, and that's how you could, for example, check the spelling of it. For most people, they learn what to catch either by having it thrown on them or by reading the documentation and understanding from the documentation what exceptions are likely to be thrown. I'm going to put breakpoints in both of these and run the application again. And just to tell them apart, let's put more information in here. So that when I catch the out of range exception, I print out a more detailed message. So we'll run it. We end up in this catch. If I take a look at E, I can again see that message, invalid vector subscript. And if I step over the line, my message prints out on the screen. If I continue to just step, notice we do not stop here and catch this. It's a really important piece of information. A try block can have any number of catches after it. And basically the exception is offered to each block in turn. The first catch block that catches what's been thrown gets it. All the others get skipped. To show this, I'm going to flip the order of my two blocks. So when I only caught an exception, out of range inherits from the exception class, so it was caught. When I caught both an out of range and an exception in that order, the out of range block caught it. Now, if I put breakpoints in both of these and run it, we're in the first catch block that catches the more general exception and prints out the more general message. And we don't go into the second one. So it's very important, let me just put these back in the right order, very important to catch the most specific exception first when you're using an exception hierarchy, and you should be using an exception hierarchy, and I'll talk more about that shortly.